By 02:17 local time on the night of July 22, 2026, a Ukrainian air defense tracking station registered something unusual. Not incoming, outgoing. 8 targets, spaced roughly 40 seconds apart, lifting off from a staging area near Zaporizhia and climbing to an altitude of just under 300 meters. They were not cruise missiles. They were not fixed-wing strike drones loaded with warheads. They were hunters. And the things they were hunting, 8 Geran-3 jet-powered drones already burning north across the Ukrainian interior, had no idea they were being followed. The Geran-3 is not a slow machine. It cruises at around 200 kilometers per hour and can push significantly faster in a dive. It carries a warhead. It navigates by satellite and inertial reference. It is, by any honest accounting, a reasonably sophisticated weapon, and it was designed with one very specific purpose in mind, not just to strike targets, to drain Ukraine dry. Every drone that crossed the border was not merely a weapon, it was a budget argument. It forced Ukraine to respond with something that cost 6, 8, sometimes 10 times more than the drone itself. That math, repeated night after night across hundreds of launches, was supposed to be the real war. Not the explosions, the arithmetic. The slow bleed of a country that could not afford to keep buying the ammunition it needed to survive. But something changed on the night of July 22nd. Something that nobody in the Russian drone program had planned for. 8 Geran-3s went north. 8 went up to meet them. And by the time the sun rose over Kyiv, every single Geran had been eliminated. Not by a surface-to-air missile. Not by a Patriot battery or a NASAMS launcher. By another drone. A drone that cost a fraction of what it destroyed. Stay with this until the end, because what happened in that 90-minute interception window does not just change Ukraine's air defense bill, it potentially rewrites the entire logic of the Russian drone campaign, the logic that Moscow has been betting on for nearly 2 years. Let's go back to where this story actually starts. Not the night of the intercepts, earlier. To understand why the JetKiller exists, you have to understand what the Geran-3 was built to do, and why it was so difficult, so expensive to stop. The original Geran-3s, the Iranian design that Russia first began deploying in the autumn of 2022, was a propeller-driven delta-wing loitering munition, slow, loud, relatively easy to track once it was in range. Ukraine's air defense forces learned to handle it with a combination of ground-based guns, modified shoulder-launch systems, even FPV drones scrambled on short notice. The intercept cost was manageable. The Geran-3 changed that equation entirely. Russia's Geran-3 is a jet-powered variant. It does not putter, it screams. Reports from Ukrainian OSINT analysts and Western defense observers who have tracked its development through 2025 and into 2026 describe a platform with a small turbojet engine, almost certainly derived from the Geran-3 50 series, giving it a top speed of somewhere between 500 and 600 kilometers per hour in operational configuration. That speed matters. Not because it makes the drone impossible to track on radar, it doesn't, but because it dramatically compresses the engagement window for every ground-based system Ukraine operates. A Geran-3 crossing into defended airspace at 550 kilometers per hour gives a Patriot battery approximately 90 seconds of viable engagement geometry, depending on angle and altitude. A NASAMS battery, with its shorter-range AIM-120 missiles, has even less. And every time one of those batteries fires, it burns through ammunition that takes months to manufacture in the United States or Norway and weeks to ship to Ukraine. Here is where the arithmetic becomes brutal. Ukrainian defense officials, citing figures that align closely with independent analysis from the Royal United Services Institute in London and the Kiev-based Center for Defense Strategies, have estimated that Russia was manufacturing Geran-3 airframes at a cost of somewhere between $50,000 and $80,000 per unit by early 2026. Production had scaled significantly, with facilities in Alabuga and at least one additional dispersed manufacturing site contributing to a sustained launch rate. The intercept cost on the Ukrainian side told a very different story. A single AIM-120C missile, the round NASAMS fires, carries a unit cost of approximately $400,000. A Patriot PAC-3 MSE intercept round runs higher still, at around $4 million per shot. The ratio, at its most conservative, was 5-to-1. At its worst, it was closer to 50-to-1. Ukraine was spending $50 for every dollar Russia spent. Every night the launches continued, the ledger got worse. This was not an accident. Russian military planners understood the mathematics perfectly. The Geran campaign of 2025 and 2026 was not primarily about destroying power stations or ammunition depots, though it did both. It was primarily about forcing Ukraine to spend money it did not have and ammunition it could not quickly replace. It was an attrition campaign aimed not at the Ukrainian military, but at the Ukrainian defense budget and, behind it, the patience of Western governments writing the checks. The question that nobody had a clean answer to, through 2024, through 2025, into early 2026, was how do you break that math without simply buying more expensive missiles? The people at Skyfall had an answer, or they believed they did. Skyfall is a Ukrainian defense technology company. It emerged publicly in the context of the drone development acceleration that followed Russia's 2022 full-scale invasion, when Kyiv essentially opened the door to any domestic or diaspora engineering team that could produce something useful. By 2025, Skyfall had moved beyond proof-of-concept work and was operating a dedicated interceptor drone program. The project had a name, internally at least, but what it produced was the system announced on July 22, 2026, the JetKiller. The name is blunt, the concept is elegant. Rather than building a faster missile to chase a faster drone, Skyfall's engineers approached the problem from a different angle entirely. The Geran-3 is fast in a straight line, but it is not maneuverable. It follows a waypoint-guided flight path with limited capacity for evasive action. It emits a thermal signature, the exhaust plume of its turbojet, that is consistent, trackable, and distinguishable from ambient background noise under the right sensor conditions. And it operates at altitudes, typically between 200 and 500 meters during terminal approach, where a fast, purpose-built interceptor drone can reach it. The JetKiller is, by every account Skyfall has released, a relatively small platform. Wingspan in the range of 1.8 to 2.2 meters, based on imagery from the unveiling. It is itself jet-propelled, or uses a high-thrust electric ducted fan configuration. Skyfall has not confirmed the propulsion type publicly, though thermal imagery from the overnight trial suggests a clean, low-smoke exhaust profile consistent with electric propulsion. Its guidance system is the key element. It carries a combined optical and infrared seeker optimized specifically for the heat signature of a small turbojet engine at the altitudes, and closing speeds relevant to a Geran-3 intercept. It does not try to outrun the Geran. It approaches from an angle, typically from above and slightly behind, and uses a proximity fuse to detonate within lethal range of the target. The intercept package that launched on the night of July 22nd was the first operational combat evaluation of this system under real conditions. Not a range test, not a simulation. 8 Geran-3 drones, tracked entering Ukrainian airspace on what appeared to be a coordinated multi-axis strike aimed at infrastructure in the Poltava and Dnipropetrovsk directions. Skyfall, in coordination with elements of the Ukrainian Air Force's Unmanned Systems Command, scrambled 8 JetKillers from a forward staging area within minutes of the first radar confirmation. Let's reconstruct what that interception looked like, from the best available reporting and from what we know about the systems involved. At 02:17 local time, the moment we opened this story, the JetKillers were already climbing. Each one was assigned a track. The targeting handoff came from ground-based radar systems, almost certainly including elements of the 64L6M Gamma DE three-dimensional radar, which Ukraine has operated as a medium-range acquisition asset throughout the war. The Gamma DE can detect targets at ranges up to 360 kilometers and track objects with radar cross-sections well below 1 square meter, relevant because the Geran-3, despite its jet engine, is a small airframe with a relatively modest radar signature compared to conventional aircraft. At this point, the Russian crews responsible for monitoring the Geran-3 packages, launch operators at a facility somewhere in Russian-controlled territory, almost certainly in the Kursk or Belgorod direction, did not know anything was wrong. The drones had crossed the border on schedule. They were following their programmed waypoints. The telemetry, to whatever extent the operators were monitoring it, showed nominal readings. 8 drones, on track, inbound. What they could not see was the 8 signatures closing from the south. By 0224 local time, the first JetKiller had achieved targeting lock. The Geran it was tracking was flying at approximately 280 meters altitude, maintaining a cruise speed estimated at around 480 kilometers per hour in this phase of flight, throttled back slightly from its maximum, consistent with fuel management on a longer range profile. The JetKiller's seeker had acquired the infrared signature of the Geran-3s exhaust plume at a range of approximately 4 kilometers and was now in terminal guidance mode. Closing geometry placed the intercept approximately 90 seconds out. For those 90 seconds, the Geran flew on. It had no warning receiver. It had no radar warning system. It had no countermeasure dispenser. It was not built to evade. It was built to navigate to a grid coordinate and detonate on arrival. The possibility that something fast and lethal was approaching from behind and below was not a scenario its guidance system was programmed to consider. At 0225:38 local time, reconstructed from Skyfall's post-event reporting and corroborating OSINT from Ukrainian aviation monitoring channels, the first JetKiller detonated within effective range. The Geran-3 it targeted ceased transmitting. The debris fell in agricultural fields approximately 60 kilometers northeast of the launch area, well short of its intended target. 7 intercepts followed over the next 83 minutes, each following a similar profile. The spacing of the JetKiller launches, staggered by roughly 40 seconds, was deliberate. It allowed each interceptor to acquire and close on its assigned target without risk of mutual interference on the infrared seeker. The last confirmed intercept occurred at 0348 local time. By 04 o'clock, Skyfall's operations team had received confirmation on all 8 tracks. 0 Gerans had reached their targets, 0 JetKillers had been lost. The cost accounting that followed that operational summary was the part that mattered most to the people in Kyiv who had been wrestling with the attrition problem for 2 years. Skyfall has not released the unit cost of the JetKiller publicly. That figure is operationally sensitive. Releasing it would immediately tell Russian planners how the cost-exchange ratio has shifted. But analysts working from disclosed component costs, the platform's apparent size and sensor complexity, and comparable Ukrainian drone development programs have estimated a per-unit cost in the range of $15,000 to $30,000 US. Even at the higher end of that estimate, the math from the night of July 22nd looked like this. 8 Geran-3 drones, at a midpoint cost of $65,000 each, represented approximately $520,000 of Russian investment in that strike package. 8 JetKiller intercepts, at a midpoint cost of $22,000 each, represented approximately $176,000 of Ukrainian expenditure. Ukraine spent roughly $1 for every $3 Russia spent. In one night, the attrition ratio flipped. The ledger that Russia had been writing for 2 years suddenly ran in the other direction. That is the number that was circulating in Ukrainian Defense Ministry circles by the time the operational report was complete. And that is the number that, if it holds at scale, breaks the strategic logic of the entire Geran campaign. Let's be precise about what this system does and does not yet represent. 8 intercepts in a single trial is a significant data point. It is not a proven operational capability at scale. Skyfall has signaled production readiness, meaning the company believes it can manufacture the JetKiller in meaningful numbers. But the Ukrainian defense establishment's ability to actually field hundreds or thousands of these platforms depends on funding, component supply chains, and sustained political will from Ukraine's international partners. The turbojet or high-thrust electric propulsion components that give the JetKiller its closing speed are not trivial to manufacture in volume. The infrared seeker, the heart of the system, requires precision optics and processing capability that represent real industrial constraints. Russia will also adapt. This is not a question of if but when. The Geran-3 was itself an adaptation, a response to Ukraine's demonstrated ability to intercept the slower, propeller-driven Shaheds. Moscow's drone development pipeline has shown consistent willingness to iterate. The Geran-3 can potentially be fitted with a radar warning receiver, though this adds weight and cost. Flight profiles can be varied: lower altitude approaches, more aggressive terminal maneuvering. To complicate an infrared-guided interceptor's targeting solution, electronic countermeasures could be added. None of these modifications are simple, and all of them add cost, which erodes the economic advantage the Geran campaign was built to exploit. But they are coming. What the JetKiller has done, what makes July 22, 2026 a date that deserves more attention than it has received, is demonstrate that the cost exchange problem is solvable, not permanently, not without sustained effort, but solvable in a way that changes the strategic calculus for both sides. If Ukraine can field jet killers in sufficient numbers, Russia faces a choice: continue launching Geran-3s at a cost ratio that no longer favors Moscow, modify the Geran at significant expense and complexity, or shift the drone campaign toward platforms that the JetKiller is not optimized to intercept. Every one of those choices is worse for Russia than the situation it was in on July 21st. The wider war picture matters here. Russia's drone campaign has been one of the few areas where Moscow maintained a persistent strategic advantage through 2025 and into 2026. Not because the drones were individually decisive, but because the cumulative economic pressure was real. Ukrainian air defense expenditures on interceptor ammunition were placing genuine strain on the replenishment pipeline from Western partners. The United States, the United Kingdom, and the European Union had all, at various points in 2025, faced difficult conversations about the pace of ammunition production and the limits of what could be sustained. The JetKiller does not eliminate that pressure overnight, but if it works at scale, it substantially reduces the rate at which Ukraine burns through the inventory that Western partners are struggling to maintain. There is one more dimension to this that has received almost no coverage outside specialist defense channels. The JetKiller is not a classified system. Skyfall unveiled it publicly, with video, on July 22nd. That public announcement was itself a message, not to the Ukrainian public, but to Moscow. It was a signal that Ukraine had solved a problem Russia believed was unsolvable on Ukraine's budget. It was also, almost certainly, a deterrence message. The next Geran package that crosses the border may not reach its target. The psychological dimension of that signal, the uncertainty it introduces into Russian launch planning, is difficult to quantify, but is not zero. The question to watch in the coming weeks is whether Skyfall's production readiness claim translates into actual fielded numbers. 10 JetKillers changes nothing at the operational level. 100 begins to matter. A sustained inventory of several hundred, distributed across forward staging areas, would represent a genuine structural shift in Ukraine's air defense architecture, one that does not depend on the resupply pipeline from Washington or Brussels for every intercept. Watch for Ukrainian official statements about procurement volumes. Watch for Russian modifications to the Geran-3 flight profile. Changes in altitude, timing patterns, or approach vectors will be the earliest visible sign that Moscow is responding to the new threat. And watch for any independent confirmation of the July 22nd intercept data from OSINT analysts tracking debris fields and radar logs. The Skyfall figures are self-reported, they are plausible, and they align with what we know about both systems. But independent confirmation will be the moment this story moves from significant claim to established fact. What happened on the night of July 22, 2026, may not look like a turning point from the outside. No city was liberated. No front line moved. The war went on. But somewhere in the accounting that both sides keep, the real accounting, the one that measures not just ground held but resources burned and advantages maintained, a number changed, the ratio flipped, and in a war that has always been as much about arithmetic as it has been about territory, that matters more than it might appear. If you want to understand this war as it unfolds, not the noise, the strategy underneath the headlines, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you are there the moment the next chapter breaks. Hit the bell. And one final note for the record, this report is news analysis and reconstruction of ongoing fast-moving events, built on reporting from major outlets, Ukrainian defense company disclosures, and open-source intelligence grounded in the facts as they are known at the time of writing. The JetKiller system was publicly announced by Skyfall on July 22, 2026. Operational details, cost figures, and intercept data reflect Skyfall's own reporting and independent analysis available at the time of publication. As the situation develops, details will change. Stay sharp, stay informed, and we will see you in the next one.